All right, Brian. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming out here to do this with me. We're recording this at the Scandinavian Center in Calgary, which has clubs for, well, as we were just going over, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and then, of course, the Icelandic Club in Calgary is based out of here as well. So we're recording this in the library. And, sitting beside us is the grand bookshelf of all the Icelandic books here that the club has in their library. And a number of those books are from you, yourself, being an author. So maybe my first question actually would be just how many books have you published? Maybe all of them. And then how many are related to Iceland and your Icelandic heritage?
Okay. I've written about 40 books, and I've got about half a dozen that are directly Iceland related. I started writing after the birth of my first grandson about 20 years ago, and I wanted to capture all those little family stories to record for him and future grandchildren and their children and so on. And so I use that as a sort of a method to propel me into writing.
Mhm.
Excuse me. Did a little bit of fiction, but a lot of biographical and memoir work.
Mhm. And I've heard you say that before, that you wanted to capture like those stories and thinking about having them for, future generations or when your kids grow up and that sort of thing. And my question with that would be why? Because I think everyone would agree, like that's a good idea to do. But most people and most families like never do that. So why did you actually take that step and do it?
Well, like I say, after my grandson was born, I couldn't wait till he was old enough that I could tell him stories about his dad, about me, about my father. And I thought, well, what if I forget those things? So I thought maybe I better start writing them down. And actually, one of my books is I refer to as I call it Family Circus: Tales of a Normal Family, and it captures all of those little stories.
Mm, yeah. Okay. So did you have any sort of a writing background?
You know, I've got an
Is this
accounting
something you?
background, uh, I'd done lots and lots of business writing. So my writing is very stilted, very logical. So for me to move into creative writing was quite a stretch, and I don't know if I've quite accomplished that yet, but I try very hard at it.
Sure, sure.
But I took a first stab at doing full creative writing when I took a lot of those little stories and converted it into a novel based on a period of time of my father's life called Gil. That was the name he was known by at the in his working life. His actual name was Gisli Simander Bordford. Uh, and so I didn't know much about his life. He died when I was in my 20s, so I never got all of that time to really
Mm,
learn about him and his background, his family, and so on, because he passed away too early. So I did a lot of research and spent some time in the library in Winnipeg, because that's where he spent those years. It was from 1945 to 51 up to my birth. And so I converted all of that into a novel about his life at that time.
mhm. So at that point, it was sort of like a research project, but then did you have to fill in a lot of the blanks and sort of get a bit creative in the
I did. I took, I talked to a lot of family members who, knew him, older brothers and older sisters, got some information from them. I also researched the time frame because it was like in the 1940s, just the post-war years,
Mm,
and, so I made sure I spent a lot of time at the Winnipeg Library just getting a feel for
mm,
what was going on in the city at that time,
yeah.
what was being advertised and so on.
Mm.
And
That sounds like a lot of fun.
it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, because it was a novel, I had a lot of literary freedom, so,
Mm,
I wanted to portray my father as I knew him, his character. So I didn't although most of the stuff in there is factual, it's not necessarily factual in the time frame. Like, I take stories from the '60s and impose them into the 1940s prior to my birth.
And what makes you do that? Are you just writing it and you think, oh, this would fit in better here? You're just kind of
Yes,
see it out?
yes, and of course, I'd already started gathering all those little family stories, and a lot of them were about my dad and my interaction with my dad. So I took some of those things and then took me out of the picture because I wasn't born yet,
Sure.
put somebody else in there and put it in the 1940s time frame, but it still gave a picture of his character.
Does it ever get difficult to track these? Like when you're writing this, does it ever get so? large and you think, oh wait, which era is this? How does that go together?
I had to do a lot of mental gyrations to work my way through that to make sure I wasn't stumbling too far on stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and now we're jumping around a little bit here, but oh well, so is the nature of conversations. Your most recent book is Helga's Saga?
Helga's Saga, yeah.
Yeah. And is that now more just uh, nonfiction?
It's a
Novel.
novel.
Okay. Okay.
It's very
Very similar to Jill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah, it's
Jesus.
fiction, but it's based entirely on the life of my great-grandmother,
Mm,
who was born in the Borgafjord district
right.
and emigrated to Canada in, 1886. So, but
1886.
I did a lot of research on her life. I first of all wrote a, short biography of her life,
Okay, I see.
and, uh, and I just called it Helga Gieseledottir
Mhm.
Borgford, and, wrote the biography, and as I wrote the biography, I thought, "That's an interesting life. That would make a really good story." So I converted it then into a novel and then created dialogue and settings and that sort of thing, trying to be true to the scene. I've made a couple trips to Iceland to make sure I could describe the scenery and the events and stuff, and I've done a lot of, reading and research into what life was like in the, 1800s in Iceland.
Mhm. Yeah, is there anything that stands out exactly with that research into life in the 1800s in Iceland?
Yeah, it was definitely a hard life, and, it was hard on children because children had to grow up fast, and there's odd things that happened to children you didn't know quite why. Like,
Right.
my great-grandmother was one of 17 children,
Mm.
6 of whom didn't live past the first year. Um, but she was only one of those children, 17 children, and she was sort of plucked out of the middle of them and put on another farm to grow up from the time she was a baby, and it often puzzled me as to why would she be the only one?
And did you get any
I've got some hints, and I inserted that into the novel that the father that she knew may not be her father, and the person who may in fact be her father was a wealthy farmer in the neighboring farm, and he was known as a bit of a womanizer. He's a very well known politician.
yeah. This makes me think, did you go to the INLNA convention in Banff?
I didn't go to the actual convention, but I did go to the Icelandic Roots dinner,
Oh,
and so I interacted
yeah.
with a lot of people there.
Yeah, I think that's maybe when I first met you actually.
Yeah.
They had a film there, which I'm blanking on the name. It was actually screened just before that dinner. And it was a similar sort of thing where it was a story. This was a bit later in that immigration sort of period, or I guess after it, during World War II, I believe it was taking place. But it was sort of showing the uh, just kind of a guy on a farm and being interested in a woman from the next farm, and they're both already married, and they had this whole thing, and then they were fantasizing about, what do we do? Maybe we'll go and start a new life in America, and just the whole story made me think like, wow, I wonder how much this was the actual reason behind so many of, again, these mysteries that if you see on genealogy records, it's like, oh, okay, so this person like moved here for some reason. There's no explanation. I'm sure so much of that was like these human stories, emotional sort of things or like romance sort of situations or just whatever have you. And that was very insightful to see that on the screen. And it just made me think, wow, I'm sure this is like the missing piece to so many of these family stories that it doesn't exactly come across when you're just looking at genealogy.
Yeah, and I did uncover a lot of those when I was doing my research and talking to people there. I met some cousins who grew up in that district, and they know a bit about my family background there. And I found a few examples of that in the family where there was affairs that went on that produced offspring that created a whole another branch to the family.
Right, right. Yeah. And I find that very interesting. And that's where yes, like in the genealogy records, that doesn't always come across, but that's why stuff like this, like writing stories, having conversations where there's so many, like you say, oral stories that you can only get by going and talking to relatives. That is all like right beside the genealogy pursuit, and so these things all come together to just give like this whole picture of our history and all the different stories that have come before us. And I guess you're really on that sort of mission to gather those things together. Do you have any, I guess, like concerns when you're writing these as more fiction that becomes a bit different than what you said, which is capturing stories, like family history for future generations. Now, at this point, you're writing novels, so of course, people reading them in the future will recognize that this is not exactly their dialogue, but it still sort of paints that picture. You ever think about how that will be like received then in the future?
It is a bit of a concern, and that's why in a lot of cases what I've done is I've paired the novel with a biography. So with Helga, I've got her biography, but I've also got the novel. So if somebody's really concerned about that, they can take a look at the both.
Right.
Same with Gil. I not only wrote a novel about his life, but I wrote a short biography similar to what I did with Helga. And then uh, what really got me going on a lot of this stuff was I'd wished that my father had documented a lot of his life or told me about a lot of his life because I didn't have the background. And I thought I wish his father had done the same. And then accidentally, I ran across a cousin I'd never met, and it turns out she had a whole basement full of archival information, including a manuscript that my grandfather had written in the 1940s when he was in his 70s, uh, detailing his life as he wanted people to see it. And it was in his word. And it was poorly written. It was typed, yeah, typed sheets. It was poor grammar and that sort of thing. But what I thought I'd do is I'd just type it all up and also put the original documents in there.
Oh, wow.
And I put it together as called it Thorson's Boardford story because that's what he had written on the top of his typewritten page, and it's his personal memoir in his words. And then I decided, well, there's more to his life than what he wants to talk about. So that's when I did a lot of research about him and his background. He was fairly well known at the time. He was a builder. He built a lot of significant structures, including the Manitoba legislature and several other places around Manitoba and Western Canada, the original Georgia Viaduct, for example. And so there's a lot of newspaper articles about him, things that were written, and so I was able to sort of fill in the rest of his life. And again, talked to cousins, went through cousins' basements and things, got whatever pictures, documents that I could find. And then I also decided, well, I wanted to turn his life into a novel, the same as I did with Gil. But so far, what I've done is I created a young adult novel about the first 16 years of his life, and I called it A Viking's Journey. And it's from his birth to when he turned 16 in Canada. So he was born in Iceland, traveled to Canada when he was 12, and then the first 4 years of his life in Canada, where he started establishing his career. But that's a young adult novel. And again, I took a lot of the information from my biographical information and his memoir to create that book.
Yeah, what an interesting journey to go down. First of all, in your perspective, being able to have uh, that sort of a relationship going through this manuscript that he had typed up, and then being able to work around that. I mean, that's a very interesting uh, experience to have. And then this too, just the idea of the story of the young immigrant. I mean, that's very young. I mean, these stories are not uncommon, of course, but it is interesting when you really think through all the ramifications. What would that be like arriving here at 16 years old? Hmm.
Yeah.
Was there any surprising things that came to mind when you were going down that journey, albeit by typing and fading it, but
Well, the writing journey certainly exposed me to a lot of things, but also the research leading up to it.
mm,
When I'd found this cousin that I'd never met before, she and I decided to arrange a family reunion and get all of the cousins together that none of us had really met or grown up or knew each other, but all of the grandchildren of Thorsten, and we got them together in Winnipeg in 2014.
mm,
And my cousin Karen arranged to sort of have a 3-day reunion and a tour of everything that was associated with his life at that time.
mm,
And one of the most noteworthy things for me was we spent an evening having supper at a place called Kennedy House, which is just outside of just northwest and northeast of Winnipeg on the Red River. Uh, yeah, it's the Red River. And it's an old stone house that was owned by an old sea captain named Captain William Kennedy, who had sort of settled down in that area. He's quite a well-known politician and visionary. And he took my grandfather on as a kind of an apprentice at 12 years old, just off the boat. And within days, he was sent out to Kennedy House to work for this Captain Kennedy. And so it was just interesting to be having supper in that place where, in 1886, he worked. And there's lots of stories in his memoirs about his time with Captain Kennedy. Captain Kennedy had a big impact on his life,
Yeah.
and it lasted him a lifetime.
Mm, mm. Yeah, there's always, those sorts of stories where it's so much luck too that's in it, right? You meet the right person at the right time, and then, just has such an impact on your life going forward, and it strikes me that that was, like, more so the case back in those days. I mean, certainly nowadays, like, you go through school and certain teachers will have a larger impact on you, and you'll have mentorship to help you with your career and that sort of thing, but it never seems to hold as much weight as, like, immigrating to a whole new country,
Yeah.
and, like, your future is really quite so unknown, and you meet this person, and they provide you with work and often, like, housing and really care for you. What was that story that you read? I'm talking to my mom who's in the audience now, about, that young Icelander, wasn't it called that? The Young Icelander.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was a story, like, living here in Canada and, yeah, going around and just, like, meeting all these different families. Um, yeah, it's quite the history to go through, and one that I think you can only really get the greatest experience of when you go through and, like, try to write these stories. Like, it's one thing to read these stories once they've been written, but I just think it's so interesting to really sit down and to create these worlds and to create these scenes while you're writing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, in his memoir, he talks about, as a 12-year-old white boy, very white, blonde hair and all that, in a Métis community, and he was, picked on a lot as being the white guy and always had to, defend himself, protect himself, and, he gave a lot of stories about, having to deal with the bullies and that sort of thing and how he dealt with it, and he was able to, negotiate that and navigate it and, become not only accepted, but, you know, a leader amongst the group
Sure.
there. And so he had those stories, but me writing them, then trying to put myself in his shoes,
Yeah.
gave me a better appreciation for when he had to fight the bullies,
Mhm, mhm.
beat them up.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, never a easy life for those who came before us.
Right, and his mother and father and the rest of his family had moved off to Gimli, but
Mm,
they needed money to survive, so they sent him off to work so
right.
that he could earn money. They sent him to school there, did chores around the house, and then whatever money was sent back to the family in Gimli, who were establishing a home for them. So he wasn't even with his family.
Right, sure. No, those are just really so hard to fathom. It's not so dissimilar to like a Charles Dickens novel. You know, just these stories of really real hardship being like I mean, a kid for all intents, like 16 years old. Like you're so young at that age, and of course younger than that even is
Yeah, he was 12 when he
for
started this, yeah.
yeah, to having to be working and yeah, providing money for your family. It's just such a different world.
Yeah.
Hmm. Now I'm looking at these books as you've kind of been going through them here. Now every one of them has been published through Amazon. Was that
Yeah, I use, their platform called, KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, and it's a service you can sign up for free. You just have to have an Amazon account, and, then, you can just load up your books once you've got them typed up, load them up there, check them to make sure the formatting looks good. There's
mhm.
online easy to figure it on
Sorry to interrupt. You load them from like say a Microsoft Word document.
Word or PDF or
Okay.
pretty much any format
Mhm.
you can, and then they give you an online facility to examine what it'll look like in book form. If you don't like it, you adjust it and reload it and so on. You can design your own cover, or you can bring in a cover design that somebody else had done, and they provide some online platforms to help you, make your cover. And then once you're happy with it, then you, send it off to sort of a pre-publishing where you can, uh, review it and, decide, is that what you want to do? And you can order author copies so you can see what it actually looks like in
Mhm.
the print form. And if you decide that's as far as you wanna take it and you don't wanna publish it for the world,
Mhm.
you can stop at that point and just use it as a print service. And the only time you have to pay anything is when you decide you're gonna, print a physical book for yourself
Right.
and then have it shipped to you, and so you have to pay for the printing and the shipping.
Mm.
That combined is cheaper than, going to a local print service and printing off a file.
Right. Sure. And as we were just talking before recording this, you get like these physical, actual book versions, and the alternative, if you are like writing family history books, or you know, for example, my mom's been trying to do a similar thing where there is thankfully a lot of writing of stories from my hobby, and again, not every family is lucky enough. Some people just didn't have the time in their life to write down stories, but I think most families have at least something that they could find, and then it's a matter of what do you do with that, right? Do you just print copies so that people in your family can have it, or do you take the approach that you've done, where not only do you type up some of these manuscripts and put them into book form, or then do you take that further, write novels about it, and get a bit more creative, more engaging with that? Because I imagine too, again, if we're thinking about future generations or younger folks, it'd be more accessible to read stuff like this in a novel version than just some of these maybe just typed up stories that could be a little long and drawn out.
Yeah, and that's the way it was with the manuscript I read from my grandfather. It was very stilted, very, matter of fact type thing,
Mhm.
and although it was the facts were interesting, it wasn't written in a very interesting fashion. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to turn that into something that people could really relate to?
Yeah, and then have more fun engaging with, because otherwise, then you run the risk of just, okay, you've done the work and you've published in the history, but if nobody really cares to read it, then
Yeah.
it's still just not really not really completing that process. Yeah, which is something to consider. So you can go through this process, get the book formats, and now in your case, you've taken that step to release most of these, if not all,
They're
to
all
public
they're all
versions.
published, and there's a final button you push when you're happy with it. You click the publish, thing. They put it through an editing process just to make sure that it meets all their criteria. Might come back with an error that you gotta fix or whatever.
Mm,
But then at that point, once you hit that publish button, it's available for the world. And, I published most of my books for personal reasons, for
mhm,
family reasons. But I also would like the world to see it, and they do sell. They don't necessarily sell hundreds or thousands,
mm,
but, they all sell.
mhm.
People from around the world, and I can see where they're being purchased in
Right, right.
Germany, Australia, or whatever, and, there's people around the world who are interested in these topics,
Mhm.
and they
And
do
it's
buy.
not so dissimilar to when I upload this podcast. You see the same thing, the distribution. And of course, with this, it's mostly people in the Icelandic roots community that are finding it. But then there's all these other people that you just see from random countries, Mexico,
Mhm.
Australia. And I'm thinking, oh, that's so interesting. It's just someone who's maybe looking for a story about this certain thing and they happen upon it. And that's kind of a cool opportunity, whether it's again publishing or distributing a book through Amazon or a podcast through the internet. It's kind of cool that now we can like connect these stories so widely. And I mean, the world, it's such a huge place that why wouldn't there be someone interested in, a story of Icelandic Canadian immigrant from the, late 1800s. And it's very cool to put that out there to the world, and I think that's great of you for doing this actually, because I think a lot of folks may still be a little leery. That's like they don't necessarily want these stories to be available to the public. And I think that's reasonable for certain things that are, very private and that should be just kept in the family. But other ones that are just stories about, what work did this person have to do when they were first living here, and how did those dynamics go? I think that's really uh, good to put out there in the world. So have you ever had any, like, concerns about that? Like, thinking, like, "Should I make this available or not?"
I did, as a matter of fact, especially in writing Gill, because there's a lot of family secrets. Uh, I don't know what it's called, skeletons, if you want to call
Sure.
it that.
Yep.
But and some were rumors, some were real, and I knew they would enhance the story.
Mhm.
But is it something I want to be putting out there? Because some of the people were still alive when I wrote it, and I thought, the heck with it. I'm not, it's a novel. I'm just making stuff up, although some of it's not necessarily made up. And there was one particular piece about an illegitimate child within the family, and I was really nervous about putting that in there, but I put it in there. And I was wondering, are those family members who I knew remotely, would they be interested in this book, pick it up and say, "Oh, they're talking about me." And fortunately, unfortunately, the one individual just passed away this past week at 85, age 85, something like that. She was the illegitimate child, and I was talking about her in there. And I thought, well, if she ever read this, what would she think?
Yeah. Well, I think it's yeah, it's an interesting thing to go through, but I think it's the right approach that you're taking. And I mean, has anything negative happened in your life because of this?
No, no, nothing has happened as well. And
Yeah.
I did, like, I've written a lot of memoirs as well. And one of the memoirs I wrote was my first trip to Iceland in 2015. It was, a very life-changing trip. I went there for the purpose of researching my grandfather's life, but I found much more than just that. And that this experience itself, it's only a 2-week trip with Snorri, with the Snorri Plus. But it's still an interesting thing. So I wrote a memoir on it, and along with all the pictures and so on. And I talk about the individuals I traveled with. I tried to be as complimentary to them as possible, but some people have little idiosyncrasies that I thought was worth noting, and I noted it in there.
This is so interesting. I didn't realize you wrote this book. So this was not to talk about myself necessarily here, but I had kind of the same process. I'm in the middle of this process actually. When I first went on Snorri, I guess 3 years ago now, I took all like my journals that I was writing and on the on the trip. And when I got home, I thought, oh, I should like type these up, and I could just exactly similar to this process, just put together a basic sort of book, which was my experience on the Snorri program. But my problem was as I started writing, there were so many interesting stories that were connecting to so many different things that I realized I was starting to write like this grand book. And as I was writing that, exactly as you say, some idiosyncrasies with certain people and different things. I was writing in a way that I thought, oh no, I don't know this person would be like willing to have me write about them in this way. Again, nothing like negative, but just different stories and different quirks about people and observations. And so I kind of got stuck in this process where I thought, at this point, do I fictionalize things so as to not have to restrict my writing? And then I thought, okay, let's try that. And as I started going, I realized something that I learned to be true for myself. I don't know if every other writer has this problem, but I thought as I started writing more and more, what happened was I wasn't actually getting closer to having a finished product. I was getting further away because I was getting more unsure. Like, what am I writing here? Is this grand fictional novel about, experiences? Or is this like a memoir and just a documented experience about what I did? And so I'm still really in that process because I've developed these other writing projects along the way and it's become quite the thing. But I am kind of reining it in again
Yeah.
and getting something that I think I could finish here soon. But that's very interesting. I didn't realize that you did this with your first trip there. That's a yeah similar process as I'm in the middle of.
Okay, well, if you'd find it useful, you can have that one.
Yeah, sure. Wow, that would be useful. I think.
And you might find that you've got, multiple projects out of that
Yes.
and more than just one book. I went there to write the story of my grandfather, and then this came out.
As a byproduct.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
so
Yeah.
it's a separate book. I could have included it in that, but
Hmm.
thought, "No, I'm gonna make it a separate book."
Well, I think yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I was never having the intent to write about like my family history exactly, but I would find like references. I would write about where I was, like in Iceland and what I was doing. And then I would think about, my Ami and Abi's trips when they were there and they actually did a lot of writing. My mom has found a lot of like journal entries that her mom wrote about their trips and that my Abi did too. And so when I would reference back to those, I'm thinking again, as you say, like, is this a second project or do I incorporate this in? And I'm still along that way, but as you show here, there's nothing wrong with, writing multiple books,
You
right?
can have more than one, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a interesting process for sure. These are all, like, really quite good quality too. I mean, it's nothing new to me. I've definitely read a lot of books that are published through Amazon, but I think, not everyone is totally aware of, like, how easy the process is and what good, quality it comes from. I was meaning to ask too, when did you first publish a book
Um,
this way?
the,
And was it always through Amazon? Like,
it was always through Amazon. I found out by accident when I started writing these, stories up. I I belonged to a worldwide website that did sort of encouraged writers. It was a worldwide community of writers, and you'd write short stories and critique other people. And through that, I got notice of a company called Create Space. It's gone now, but it was affiliated with Amazon, and you could use their services to help you put your book together. So I put a couple of short things together. One, just a 700 word story, just of a small incident that happened to me in my teens, and just for the heck of it, I just put it up on Amazon as a Kindle version. You have to be at least 25 pages before you can get a print book, but you can put anything up as a Kindle book. So it was a 700 word story. I put it up on Kindle. Few people read it. I put it up for 99 cents. Not too many people are going to pay 99 cents for 700 words. And so I did that. Then I wrote a kid's story, which I didn't realize was a kid's story until kids started reading it.
Ah,
Was about a childhood dog that I had that got lost. That I created a story about what happened to the dog during that period. I called it Pepper, and I put that up on Amazon just as a Kindle book, and it started going out by the thousands at 99 cents a piece. I probably made $5,000
oh, no.
off that book.
And
And kids, that was in about 2012.
okay,
I
okay.
put it out, and it just thousands of them started going out. It's right around the time that the Kindle uh, device started to become popular,
I was
and I
gonna
got
say
the
it seems
impression,
like a right time
yeah,
sort of thing.
and so it seemed as though parents were probably buying their children Kindle readers
Mm.
and giving them the right to go find stuff, and they all found Pepper. And like I say, I think, including some freebies that I sent out, I think it's circulated about 10,000 copies.
Yeah, wow.
And so that was
And
the
totally unexpected.
yeah, it just came out of the blue, and there I would look online, and there was another 1,000 went out today, another 1,000 went out.
Wow.
And then all of these kids were I put my email address in there, so kids were emailing me, and I was replying to it, and they started putting reviews up on Amazon.
Wow.
So I got several hundred reviews up
Mm.
on Amazon.
And that sort of like keeps the momentum going.
Yeah. So I thought, "Well, this is good." So I thought I'd try another one. So I took another dog that I had in my adulthood and created a biography of that dog, and that didn't have quite the same success, but still, it sold a lot, probably 2 or 3,000.
Yeah.
And, uh, and then that's when I started thinking, well, maybe and that's when I decided I'd go with Gil and put it out there. And I used the services of that Create Space, which had uh, fairly inexpensive editing services and things like that. And they helped me with the cover design and that sort of thing. It was quite an inexpensive process. Now that whole industry has taken off, and
Right. Certainly.
yeah,
And all become much more easy to access. That's a very, very fun story.
yeah.
Yeah. Of just getting started with that.
And I used the Pepper book became quite popular. My wife, who was teaching grade 4 at the time when we were overseas, she took it to her students at class and assigned it as reading, and then brought in the author as a visit. And my niece was teaching a grade 4 class in Winnipeg at the time, and she did the same thing. And I came in as an author visit. And then my grandchildren were going to school down in, they were about the same age going down to school in California. And they assigned that book down there, and I came down for an author visit. So it was a lot of fun, yeah.
Yeah, that is a fun process. And it goes to show too. I mean, you don't have to be an author as your one and only career to be able to at least experience the joy of being able to do that and do some things in person, like you did go into the classroom.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to remember, and actually a reminder to myself too, who's again thinking about trying to publish something. It doesn't have to go all the way, and it's probably the best in this case as well when you don't necessarily have large expectations, and then anything that comes is just sort of a surprise and a bonus, right?
Yeah, I didn't go into this with the intention of becoming a career author. Like I say, I was an accountant by background, so writing creatively was quite a challenge and still is. I have to really work at it because I'm not naturally inclined that way. So I wrote, came into it as a hobby, as a pre-retirement activity, and then as I entered into retirement 10 years ago, I thought I'm going to make the bulk of my retirement about family, grandkids, and then writing, and that's what I've been doing in my 10 years of retirement is writing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good for you. I really have a lot of respect for for people who choose to do this because again, it is a choice. You have to decide. Like I think everyone agrees that all of these things are good, and again, the family history or just the fun stories for kids, whatever it is, everyone thinks like, well, these are great things for the world to have. But you have to make that choice. Like I'm going to actually dedicate some time to do this, and it's amazing to me how many people will spend their whole lives and never get into that process. And I think it's really sad. You think about all the stories that are lost in this way. And as you demonstrate in today's world, there's really no excuses. These are very easy things to do. There's far less barriers than maybe there used to be, and you don't have to have large expectations. But it's very important to do these things. And again, you cannot even imagine the impact that these may have for future generations. Like you have no idea what's going to happen. And think about all the books that we read today that are written from, the saga writers from way back in the day that couldn't have even thought about the impact their writings would have, for us living here in the 21st century. So I think it's a very important process. And again, I take my hat off to you for doing this. Um, yeah. Could you talk maybe a bit more about the writing process then too? Like, how do you like to write? Is it something that I'm always very interested in this? Like, does it come to you in the morning, drinking coffee? Is it like a evening thing, like Stephen G. Stephenson, staying up late at night and writing in that way? What is that like for you?
For me, it's a morning process. I get up about 5:30 every morning and do my regular computer activities, check email, correspondence, check the news, that sort of it. And then I'll usually decide I'm going to do something relative to writing at that point. And then once I've got that kind of started, then I head off to the gym, do a workout, come home. Then my wife and I go out for coffee. I write at coffee shops. That's where I really like writing. There's noise, there's ambient noise around, and it just allows me to sort of shut that noise out and focus on my writing. And I need to have that sort of hubbub around me to help focus me on the writing. And so I'll spend maybe an hour or 2 hours in the morning at a coffee shop writing. And if I'm on a roll, then I'll go home and do some more on the computer at home. But I like that outside environment for writing. And a lot of my writing when we were living in the Middle East at the time, we'd go out for coffee and I'd take my computer and I'd spend sometimes 2 or 3 hours writing these stories. That's where a lot of these originated from, was
Yeah.
coffee shops in the Middle East.
Yeah. Wow. And what stories were you working on in that location particularly? Some of the Iceland books too?
So some of the I hadn't really gotten into the Iceland stuff. Gil started around that time, but
Mm.
I wrote a few fiction stories around that time. I remember one example. We were in a in Patong in Thailand, sitting in an outdoor coffee shop, and I'm writing a fiction novel, a fiction story. It was a short story, actually, about I don't know, 40, 50 pages, something like that. And so I'd sit on the patio coffee shop writing a chapter, and my wife would go wander around. Then she'd come back, and I'd give her a piece of it and say, "Well, what do you think of this?" She'd say, "Well, that's great. What happens next?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't written it yet. Why don't you go shop some more, and I'll write some more." So, so I did a lot of my fiction writing, creative writing, try to work on my
Mhm.
ability to be a creative writer around that time.
Well, I think that's important. Like environment, I think is definitely a way. If you're trying to be creative and just in an office in sort of accountant mode, then it won't come to you, right? You need to sort of get out into different environments. And I experience that a lot too in the cafes. And yeah, there's something about shutting out. I mean, you would think, like, why would you go there if your goal is to shut out all the noise? But there's something about the process of your brain ignoring
Yeah.
all of the conversations and the music and then focusing on the writing. I think there's something that goes on between the outside world and the inside world that's influencing
Yeah.
each other in this weird sort of a way. But that's I think, a really good tip for trying to break out and just allow your mind to be creative in different ways.
But once I had the book written, the story written, and I had to do the massaging, editing, and that sort of thing, then I need my quiet time in front of my computer at home. And when I'm formatting and putting it up there and putting it on Amazon, I need that quiet time without people around me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, besides input and some pre-readings from your wife, do you get anyone else to edit any of your books, or do you just go through that process on your own?
It depends on the nature of the book. If it's something that I'm just putting out uh, for my own purposes, I don't go too far. But Helga, for example, I did a lot of outside. Had a lot of outside readers. I'm part of a few writing communities, and we share writing back and forth. And in some cases, I actually, like with Helga, I did put it out to a manuscript review. I actually paid for a manuscript review, and then and got some people to do some editing and that sort of thing. But I got a lot of people to read the structure of the story first, find out is it something that would be interesting, and then I had people help me massage it with their input. I did the massaging of it, and then ultimately get some beta readers, and they would read my book, I would read their book, and we'd do constructive criticism back and forth. So in something a major project like Helga, which took me 2 or 3 years to do, I got a lot of outside help for that.
Yeah. And was it worth it? Like,
Oh
it
yeah,
sounds like a lot of work, of course, but
yeah.
yeah, get some good insights.
Feel very good about Helga. I really like that story.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I've heard like good things as well, and it's kind of you see it pop up on Facebook or these sorts of things, and in Icelandic Roots, I think we definitely have some fans there of the book. So yeah, is there anything else you would like to talk about that's come to mind? That's been very interesting. I just love the stories actually of traveling and being in different parts of the world to write these things. I think myself, I never really thought about writing at all, which is kind of funny. As a little kid, I was always wanting to be very creative, and I thought about movies. You know, that's just kind of how I grew up watching Lord of the Rings and that sort of thing. And I would watch the behind the scenes sort of stuff, and coming of age with like smartphones coming online when I was in middle school and these sorts of things. It made me realize, like, oh yeah, there's a lot of possibility to be creative. And I was making Lego videos as a kid, but I never thought about writing until I went to Iceland. And I came back and I just really didn't know how to, so many cool things happened, so many things were experienced. How do I get this all together? And I think there's something still about the writing process that can never be replaced with, well, even with a podcast or with making videos. There's just something about being able to write things down that you can't replace. And I hope that continues to be true in the future as well. But it seems very much so. And I get a lot of joy thinking about sitting in cafes and writing. So I love hearing those stories and imagining you in different places in the world and doing your writing. Is it always typed up? Do you ever go pen to paper?
I'm not a good pen to paper. When I was very young, I was informed by my teachers that I better learn how to type because nobody would ever understand my writing.
Mhm.
So I don't do anything pen to paper. A lot of writers do like to do the pen to paper.
Mhm.
I have to be on a computer typing.
Mm.
I learned typing when I was a teenager in school, and it was probably the best skill I ever learned out of high school. And I use it extensively to this date. So everything goes on the computer, and then it's saved.
Yes, right. Yeah, yeah, you don't have to worry about losing the paper or something like this. Do you use the you're involved in Icelandic Roots, like you do stuff for them, writing and that sort of thing. But how much do you use the database for genealogy?
Oh, I'm probably on the database almost every day.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I use it an awful lot. I used it an awful lot in my research, and I just use it to get to know people too.
Right. Right.
So I'm on the database quite often.
Mm.
And
When did you start using Icelandic Roots?
uh, I first found out about Icelandic roots when went this trip in there. It's noted
Okay,
in the
sure.
book. And I met Suna there. I didn't actually meet her. She made a presentation. I didn't get a chance to meet her. And she talked about this database that she was establishing. It was only
Mm.
barely a year old at
This
that,
is 2012, you said. Yeah.
2015.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2015. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the early.
So she just started it in 2014. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to sign up for it. So I signed up for it at that time, and I've been on it ever since.
Yeah. Wow. And so that has influenced or educated a lot of your writings since then. You can get a lot of.
A lot of my writing and a lot of my reading because I did a lot of research around that period of time too, and a lot of books that I've read, a lot of the common books that are being talked about now in book clubs and that sort of thing, but also books that were written in 1910, 1945, 1952 about foreign travelers to Iceland. I read those books, and I used the database to help find some of the people that are mentioned in those books. And actually, those books are all available free of charge. They're free domain on Project Gutenberg. So I took several of those and republished them myself,
Okay.
and along with footnotes that of people that I found.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Wow. There's a lot of different directions you can go with these sorts of projects. And again, kudos to you for doing this. I think it's important that people, you know, follow these passions and put it all out there for all of us to to experience and to enjoy. Hmm. Anything else you'd like to?
Just to anybody who is listening to this, just write things down. Whether you consider yourself an author or not, write it down. Doesn't matter what format it's in. Just write it down, get it saved somewhere, preferably in computer format, scan it in, but get it tucked away. You can always come back to it later. If it's written, you can do something with it. If it's not written, there's nothing you can do with it. So get it written down. You may come back to it at some point later, like I did when I moved into retirement, or it may be in the case of my grandfather where he wrote it, his manuscript. He didn't know what was going to happen to it. It got tucked away in his grandchildren's basement. Nobody looked at it until unlikely me came along to find it and do something with it, you know, 70, 80 years later.
And that he couldn't have even imagined
Yeah.
how, like, the internet would come about and
That's
all these sorts of things could, come and be done
Yeah,
with
so
this, right?
so get it written. It's down on paper. Something can You can do something with it, or somebody else can do something with it. One of my projects that I'm working on right now is I inherited my dad's sister's documentation.
Mm.
She passed away 30 years ago, and somehow I ended up with boxes of all of her documentation, and that includes all of the love letters between her and her future husband from 1938 to 1941, pictures, uh, other letters, documentation, and I got that in my possession about 5, 6 years ago, and I'm just now sitting down and starting to transcribe a lot of it and decide what I'm going to do with it. Possibly turn it into a biography, possibly turn it into another novel, or both.
You ever get overwhelmed?
Yes, because I've got so many things I would like to be doing,
Yeah.
but you can't do them all at once. So I can carry about 2 or 3 projects at the same time. And right now I'm working on that project, and I'm doing a memoir on my career, my accounting career, unrelated to Iceland at all.
Sure.
So got those 2 things going on at the same time, and I can sort of entertain a couple of other ideas and put notes away, but I can only work full time on about 2 projects at a time.
Yeah, I find that too. Like, you can kind of juggle, yeah, a couple of projects at the same time. But I think beyond that, do you ever scrap anything along the way too? Scrap any whole projects, or of course, when you're writing, you do have to choose a lot of things to uninclude.
Uh, I don't know whether it's a scrap, but a shelve.
Ah, yes.
So when I was doing a lot of creative writing, the fiction stuff, I had lots of ideas. I started lots of things. They're still there. I can go back to them. But I got so enraptured with family history and that I thought, what's more important, family history or some science fiction novel? And I thought, family history is more important. So that's sort of
Science fiction novel on the go.
not a yeah. I've got one sort of started on the go,
Mm,
and I did write one, a science
mm.
fiction fantasy called Snapshots of Time.
Yeah,
Involves a bit of
yeah.
time travel.
Encountered that book. I think, yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah, we have it at home. And you
Yeah,
jump around time
yeah,
periods.
that's right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, interesting. Very cool.
And my wife had a dream one time about, a situation that occurred, a sci-fi type situation.
Mm,
So I started writing that. So I've got the makings of that, but that's about 15 years old that it's just shelved, but I've got it there.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation with you, and some great practical takeaways from it. And it strikes me too that podcasting is very similar to, as you say, like, just write it down. I think there's so much that, like, just record it too. I mean, we're using very basic technology to be recording this that just involves a phone, pretty much. And even if you don't have an additional mic, just recording on your phone, I think is very important. When we visit my hobby in Saskatchewan, he's turning 100 years old this year, and he's a great oral storyteller. He's always telling stories. And it's only been recently we decided, like, just turn on our phone and just leave it off to the side and record it. And who cares if the audio isn't good? Bad audio on the phone is a million times better than no audio, or than, like, audio from some tapes like back in the 40s or something. And so I think it's really important. And who knows, again, what you'll do with this stuff in the future, but just record those, just capture those moments. I think it's very important. And he's been, writing poetry actually, and lots of stories too. So it's fun to be able to do stuff with him, with that sort of thing.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, it things back to another project that I've got sitting on the shelf.
Mm.
Living in the Middle East, I encountered an awful lot of Palestinians, and of course, that's a big topic right now, as it always has been. And I thought that would be an interesting thing to write about. So I actually did take my phone and went out and interviewed several of these Palestinians, and I've got that recorded and saved in my archives for some future project.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. And again, even if you don't complete that project, it's there, and maybe someone can take up that torch in the future. Yeah, yeah, and it extends to definitely all sorts of things. I mean, the stuff that we're doing with Icelandic heritage, I think, is all very good and very cool. But there's, as you say, there's more, there's other topics going on in the world that are even more important and crucial to have those ideas and perspectives like maintained. The stuff that we're doing relating to Iceland is more or less just, I mean, it's for fun, but I think it's very important. I mean, there's such a literary history, and I think there's something to teach the world about the way the Icelanders have interacted with the world all throughout time, and recently as well too. So I do think, in some little way, these sorts of things are also important in the bigger scheme of
Mm.
the world too. Mhm. So Brian, we can maybe wrap up the conversation there. I will have links in the description that you can let me know where you would like people to be sent to. And yeah, they can read. You have articles on Icelandic roots as well, too. So they can access your writing that way.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right.